The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. We know that many of you are looking to bolster your security posture with cloud-native app protection and XDR. So if you haven't heard of Uptycs, put them on your radar. They offer both cloud and endpoint security in a single solution. Listeners can use Uptycs for up to 1,000 assets for a full year for only $1. But hurry, this offer is available only through December 31st at securityweekly.com/UPTYCS. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners, we need to hear your voices. Leave us your feedback on Apple Podcasts and submit a screenshot to our giveaway form for a chance to win a $100 gift card from Hacker Warehouse. This giveaway will be open until the end of the year. We appreciate your honest feedback so that we can continue to make great content for our audience. Visit securityweekly.com/giveaway to enter. All right, so this is our 2022 end of year wrap up, and we did one of these last. Okay, my voice is coming in and out. Okay. Yeah, and Sean, you brought up a great point. Like, one of the things I love to do in these wrap-ups is, well, especially the pandemic and I don't know, are we post-pandemic years? Like, it's so hard to remember like what happened at the beginning of the year by the end of it. So I think I'm going to let you kick it off, Sean.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I kind of feel like we are both post-pandemic as well as pre-pandemic. It just feels like we keep going on this roller coaster, but I digress. So yeah, in a year that started where we were still dealing with Log4j, which dropped December 20th, which is almost a year ago. The year before that, at the end of the year, we had to deal with SolarWinds vulnerability and issues around a number of attacks that were both on-prem and cloud. So we rolled into 2021 with that. We rolled into 2022 trying to figure out what was vulnerable from Log4j configurations, which appeared to be just about everything. Affected systems like VMware and others that were configured with a number of Log4j elements, which made these other systems vulnerable that we didn't think were or were not touched by that. In this year, in 2022, we saw things like more Active Directory certificate services vulnerabilities on the Microsoft side, the curb relayup attack in the Microsoft world as a local privilege attack that leverages Active Directory in order to get remote or admin access on systems, to more VMware vulnerabilities. And then, of course, the recent IPMI system firmware vulnerabilities released by Eclipsium that we talked about recently as well. So a number of things, very interesting year. I think everyone's kind of on pins and needles wondering what is going to be the big drop in the next few weeks. Hopefully it's going to be quiet so people can get some time with families. But I don't know, Adrian, what do you think? It's been a pretty interesting year.
Yeah, I mean, so we talk about markets a lot here. So I'll do my thing that you might have forgotten, and then maybe Katie will. I don't know if you have anything that we might have forgotten. Yeah, it's just kind of a theme that we came up with on the fly and we're rolling with here. But if you don't, I'll buy you some time. But for me, it was the market. So like we had Gus create these unicorn graphics, and then we were talking about, well, what's bigger than a unicorn? Okay, maybe if they hit a $10 billion valuation, we'll call them decacorns. You know, and there's different terms that are used in the industry and stuff like that. And I think Gus even had a graphic for a decacorn. And so first half of the year, I actually have a spreadsheet where I was tracking unicorns and created a new tab for every month. And I'd go in there, do some analysis. How many unicorns are we at in cybersecurity? and that ended abruptly halfway through the year. The market just dropped out, and suddenly we weren't talking about unicorns anymore. We were talking about layoffs, and I had to create a new spreadsheet tracking layoffs. And we've hit we're north of 5,000 employees laid off from cybersecurity companies at this point. I mean, that's a tiny fraction of what the jobs we've seen lost in like larger tech is more like 180,000 from what I've heard. And but still, that's completely new for cybersecurity. I don't think we've ever seen mass amounts of layoffs. I think the closest we got was the 2008 recession. We saw a bunch of NAC companies go under, so network access control companies. That's the only time I can think of that we saw a lot of companies have any kind of failures or layoffs or anything like that. Katie? There's the deck of corn. Are you on mute, Katie?
I was. I'm sorry. And there's the decacorn. There he is. How cute. Related to that, we saw a lot of acquisitions this year. We saw a lot of somewhat surprising things in the market, some not so surprising. We saw Google acquire Mandiant. We saw Thoma Bravo buy Ping Identity. We saw the merger of Human Security, first the name change to Human Security, and then Perimeter X merging. We saw one password company going passwordless. So there were a lot of really big acquisitions that happened all the while the security market was starting to, I don't want to say downgrade, because it really, it's still up from where it was, but the kind of activity, the amount of activity and the huge deal amounts are not where they were at the beginning of the year. But we still saw a lot of movement in the market. We saw some really good deals go through. I think consolidation is always going to happen. This isn't new. But some really big players this year either merging or getting acquired, or companies deciding that they wanted to get into the security game that you wouldn't necessarily think of as security companies from the onset. A company like Google, yeah, sure, it makes a lot of sense for them. But some other companies who are really jumping into the fray a little bit more, that's probably going to be a trend into 2023, because to a degree, security is future-proof. Like, as long as we have a digital ecosystem, we're going to need security.
Yeah. As long as people keep coming up with, especially like AI-based stuff, quantum-based stuff. Yeah. Tech drives security, right? Like the rush to deploy and use new tech. I mean, how many products have we already seen wrapped around ChatGPT within like weeks of it coming out? And I not a lot of thinking about security in those MVPs that we see pop up.
And we still have all the legacy stuff that's just been sitting out there forever. It's like the issues, the ghosts of Christmas past just continue with us to tie this into a seasonal thing. All the legacy things are still there. We're still managing things the way we have been. I'm wearing my green today. But yeah, it's the stuff that's been there for 5, 10, well, probably more like 10 and 20 years. And nothing's been done about it. And we can't just keep throwing security products at these to solve it. I mean, we're seeing.
Sure, we can.
Okay, we can.
Oh, well, security pros can do that. Yes, they can.
Yeah, we can and will.
More blinky boxes. That's what we need.
And this podcast will continue to cover it as we see appropriate. Like.
I think, I've been looking at year-end stuff and trying to look at numbers, look at all the data.
Yeah.
And honestly, all of the surveys that I've seen, and maybe this is just selective seeing, but all the surveys I have seen, most security practitioners don't expect their budgets to decrease. They at minimum expect them to stay the same. They're being asked to justify their expenditures, but just a little creativity goes a long way here. And, being on the marketing side of things, I can think of 400 different ways you can position something to make it also apply to operations, to also apply to IT, to also apply, financially. So it doesn't take a huge creative brain to do that. So the justification, I think, is happening more. But as far as the money to actually buy things, if you have the right justification, it's still going to be there. And the media, even the mainstream media, continues to tout this, quote, cyber threat. So that doesn't hurt security at all. I don't think we're going to see a crash. One of my favorite stories from this past year was actually talking about the, quote, crash in the vendor market.
Right.
I had many people send that to me, and it was a great article. And I could be totally eating my words in a year, but I don't think we're going to see it. I don't think that's.
Are you making a prediction?
Yeah.
Are we doing predictions now?
Sounds like a prediction.
No, I'm going on somebody else's prediction. I'm predicting
okay. I see.
prediction isn't happening because, in terms of the market, and we're talking about these down rounds and unicorns becoming zombie unicorns or whatever they're called now.
Yeah.
They're no more decacorns.
Yeah, because we don't know what the valuation actually is, right?
Right. I just don't see the market crashing. So I don't think the spend is going to dry up tremendously. We're just at a leveling out point. And I think that was one of the things that we saw this year. Looking back, it was really interesting to follow the market because everybody was saying, oh my God, all hell is breaking loose. The market's crashing. We're dying here. And I haven't seen it. I mean, yeah, there's been correction, but I haven't seen it in terms of, catastrophe and hellfire. Right.
And I also don't believe it's going to happen, but I'd love to get your thoughts on something though. Like certainly some portion of these security products are, they're getting bought and pulled into companies and aren't necessarily useful. Maybe they don't even work. Maybe they don't bring in much value. Maybe they never leave the box. Shelfware continues to be a thing in security. But the fact that you're spending the budget on security stuff still sends a signal, right? So my concern here is that some people are getting value out of just having things to spend that security budget on, even if it's just for show, even if it's just, theater, right? So how long can we continue getting away with that? Saying that, we're going to address that threat by buying this thing over here. And then of course it doesn't fix it, as an industry, are we going to start getting, whoever's buying these products, are they going to get called out on it? Or does this just keep going forever? Sean.
I don't see that changing. It hasn't changed for years. What we've been doing hasn't solved problems. Things have only gotten worse in a lot of ways. Ransomware just took over in 2020 and in 2021 and has shifted and evolved from your standard workstations and popping up a message saying, this is encrypted, you have to pay this amount of money, to affecting hospitals and people's lives. And jumping onto other systems like VMware. It's going to go to cloud. It's going to start using these chat AI systems, and that's going to get worse. These solutions that are out there have not solved the problem yet. I don't see them being able to solve the problem in the near future. But I think we really need as an industry to really focus on combining our tools with our people, to give them the information they need to make good decisions, to improve the things that we have, and really enable. I think that the company that comes out with a really good product around helping solve the legacy issues are the ones that are going to be the most successful and make the most money, because that is such an untapped market.
Yeah. Thoughts, Katie?
I think my size says it all. Yeah, I mean, the problem is, I think we have a lot of companies who would say, hey, we find your legacy solutions. Hey, we help you migrate your legacy solutions. But in reality, and Adrian, I remember you and I talked about this at Black Hat, I think in like 2016. Mm-hmm. I think it was back then. Maybe it was pre-2016. Right. And all these companies on the SIM side, the log management side, who were like, oh yeah, just buy our new SIM tool, just migrate away from, your big entrenched traditional player. We'll migrate you in a month. And we were joking. We were on the show floor at Black Hat, and you were saying, I went through a project and we were 3 years in and we still hadn't even begun our migration.
Yeah.
And so we have those problems, and I don't necessarily see them getting solved by any great new technology soon. I think Sean's right. Like, people and process are super, super important, but if people wanted to migrate their legacy technology, they might have started like 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a number of environments that have Active Directory that still stick around because of applications that can't be moved or are very difficult to move or cost money to move. I think we're going to see the same thing happening where people are going to the cloud, they're adding cloud to their portfolio, so to speak, their infrastructure portfolio, and they still are going to have these on-prem systems because you can't just lift and shift these things easily. When you shift from your on-prem Active Directory environment, I'm obviously talking about what I know, talking about your on-prem Active Directory environment, trying to shift and move that over into Azure AD or some other cloud environment is not an easy translation. Because these cloud systems don't speak the same languages, protocols around authentication, such as Kerberos and NTLM and things like that. We're talking federation when we move into cloud, and that's quite different. So a lot of companies have been looking to just lift and shift or move from Active Directory to cloud. So they've added cloud, and now they have two systems they have to manage. And I think that's one of the problems we've had for a lot of years is that we have had systems. We add new systems. Now we have another system we need to manage.
Yep.
And we do that with our same people. And the security of that it just exponentially increases. I did a talk recently called Defending the Identity Nexus. And it was all about these connectivities between identity on-prem and in the cloud, as well as infrastructure on-prem and in the cloud. We used to just have on-prem Active Directory and VMware. Now we also have cloud identity. We have cloud infrastructure like AWS, like GCP, like Azure. And cross-cloud just makes that even more complicated because they speak different languages. All the nomenclature is different. So yeah, it's gotten way more complicated, a lot faster than I think anyone thought it would. And certainly COVID sped things up with the remote work environment. And now everyone's trying to figure out, okay, what do we actually have now? And I think inventory is and identifying what is there, what is the connectivity of that should be a priority for everyone as they look into 2023.
So I think I can connect a lot of the things that you said there in that, just the amount of stuff you had. The overhead is tremendous, right? Like we didn't get rid of the data centers. We just added stuff, right? Now we have things to look at in all these different environments. They need their own specific, maybe all that stuff will get combined. Like we were just talking to Qualys about their total cloud. Where I guess the idea is eventually, you'll have, something that handles your on-prem multi-cloud, pulls all that into one place, but that's going to take time. And in the meantime, we still do have these, kind of niche point products. And that's one of the things on Paul's Security Weekly yesterday, we had a bunch of different segments. I don't even remember which one we were talking about where this comment came up. But somebody was saying, I think it was Jason Albuquerque, consolidation is really what CISOs are looking for. They're looking for more platforms, more consolidation, less number of tools to have to manage and to have to look after, because it's it would be really interesting to do another shelfware report. We did one back at 451. Javad Malik did it. And it was really interesting hearing both sides of it, because when he asked vendors why shelfware is an issue, and then when he asked customers why shelfware was an issue, he got some very different responses from each group.
So Adrian, am I hearing you say that there's so many tools, we need a single pane of glass for all of that?
Hey.
You won't hear me say that. Gus, can we meet Sean?
Interestingly, I just had a conversation with a customer, an enterprise security user versus a vendor person. And this person was saying, in fact, that they did not want a platform approach. They were really, really sick of the whole security bundling. They were sick of the whole idea that vendors wanted to be the soup to nuts, the front to end orchestration player for everything. And this person had a lot of good reasons why. Vendors who are expanding into areas that aren't their core competency, creating watered down versions, but locking you in because it's easier. It's easier from a management plane. It's easier from a cost and procurement perspective. It's easier from a maintenance perspective. All the things, that make it easy to use one tool instead of many tools. But this particular person was saying, that's not what I want, because that's not solving all of our problems. And I was surprised to hear, because it was a forum of enterprise end users, that a lot of people agreed with this person. Because I have, throughout the year, heard a lot we need a platform approach. We need a tool that does more, that's more robust. We've seen explosion in the API integration. If your tool doesn't integrate pretty seamlessly with others, what are you even doing here? That kind of thing. But this person was saying, yeah, they all need to talk to each other, but I do not want one big orchestration tool from a few companies. I still want that best in breed approach. So that was surprising to me,
Yeah.
Especially given the last few years where everybody's like, oh my God, plethora of tools.
Yeah. But given your point about people and processes, something I spent a lot of time doing is anytime there's details of a breach, I love doing postmortems. Yeah, we even did a segment on the not the old Uber breaches, but the one that happened this year. And because these attackers are sharing all kinds of details. Like we're going to talk in the news in a little bit. The reason we know what happened with InfraGard is Brian Krebs just asked him. He said, like, how'd you make this work? How'd you make this attack happen? And they're happy to tell you. And it's interesting going through the details. And almost always, I don't think I've seen a single case where I'm like, yeah, throwing some zero trust in there would have would have solved that, or buying another product. In almost every case, they had stuff. They had products. They were running systems mostly correctly, but just had things misconfigured. Or did stuff everybody knows you shouldn't do, like leaving credentials in plain text. Just amazing how we still see credentials in plain text in 2022, but we saw it in several cases this year. We saw it. We just see it over and over, and I think part of it is people don't think. They're thinking, okay, somebody on their desktop keeping a list of their passwords, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the net logon directory. A PowerShell script was the case with Uber, where a PowerShell script had a credential in it. So servers with scripts and things like that, JDBC files, with clear text logon credentials for databases. So there's like a lot of tightening up of what we've already bought and we already have that we need to do, which is why I get really excited about companies like Recon InfoSec and Rangeforce, where their purpose is like, okay, you have all these people, you bought all this stuff, let's make sure it's actually working. Sean.
Yeah, and with the Uber breach, the details of that, as you said, there was a PowerShell script that had credentials in it. There was a file that had the login credentials to their enterprise password vault, which gave access to pretty much everything else, because most companies that have a password vault load in, again, Active Directory domain admin credentials, Azure AD, AWS, and in the instance of Uber, based on the public information, that breach of, or actually finding that password file, that file with passwords, enabled the attacker to jump to their password vault to then get access to pretty much everything else as an admin. I talk with red teamers on a regular basis, and one of the things that I hear a lot is, yes, passwords are stored in files on shares. Yes, they are on workstations, in just the desktop. People will open up and manage systems by opening up that text file and copy and pasting that password into something else. And to your point, Adrian, there's a lot of issues that we've seen in breaches this year. Like Lapsus was very popular, or very active, I should say, from Brazil to Okta to NVIDIA to Samsung to Ubisoft, Microsoft, Rockstar. Like there were a lot of things that happened, and the majority of those, from what I recall, happened because they compromised a call center, or they compromised something that was a lower level of security, a partner relationship, and then jump in. That's something that we saw earlier on a couple of years ago with the SolarWinds cloud attacks, where you target the lower hanging fruit where probably the security is not as great, and a vendor with access I believe that's what happened with Target as well, going after a HVAC vendor that was then able to jump in from there. And I think these oopses, as we're, this oops, like we know this shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be there. This doesn't make sense from a security perspective, but these are here, whether they're passwords in files or access to vendors that shouldn't be there, to not having appropriate methods to ensure that when someone is changing their MFA method, that there's some security check to make sure that that's the actual person instead of someone impersonating them.
Fazio Mechanical, and the theory was that they got in through the vendor management portal, which they ran on-prem, and that got them in. Katie, I think it looked like you had some thoughts here.
Did I have some thoughts? Well, it might have changed from a few minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
I was thinking as Sean was talking, years ago, talking to Marcus Ranum about all of this, and he subsequently left security to go do blacksmithing, and his comment, although overly simplistic, was if everybody would just get back to basic sysadmin, we'd be in a much better off space. Again, overly simplistic view of the current tech landscape, but to an extent that's true. It's the small things, the beginning things, the foundational things that will always be what we need to do. And it's not just as easy as fixing it with a widget, right? It is the people and it is the process. And, there have been a million process breakdowns. Putting your passwords in clear text somewhere, that's not a technology thing. That's a process thing. And, the basic system and administrative stuff could stop a lot of these things. Again, it doesn't mean it's easy to do. It doesn't mean it's fun. There's a huge amount of burnout at that level because it's a lot of rote, kind of boring work, but it's that process stuff that if more attention were paid to it would help a whole lot. And I don't think we're ever going to see that change because it's not the fun stuff. It's not the sexy stuff.
Well, but we're spending money on it. Like, think about all the money we're spending on detection and response. Like, we've got all these huge SOCs and stuff like that. How many of these cases that you mentioned, Sean, were we actually detecting it? Like, the number one way we're detecting attacks today is when the attacker tells us they compromised us.
Right. And they're jumping in and saying they compromised it within weeks. And I can think the mean time to detection is reduced to 6 months now, maybe 5.5.
Oh, no, the mean time to detection is like, just a couple weeks now because they're telling us.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like it was, it's usually been 6 months.
That's not detection though.
Right. But, then Krebs says, "Hey, this has been compromised," or there's a Telegram chat that comes out from Lapsus or someone else that says, "Yeah, here's the proof that I did breach this organization." Yeah, it's a shame, and so what Katie's talking about with the fundamentals. I mean, how long have we been saying or have heard that we need a patch? Right, patching has been something that has had to be done since the early days of software. And we're still in a situation where patches are not getting applied.
It's too disruptive.
It is disruptive. It is a pain.
And it's not easy. Nobody is saying that this is easy, but it still doesn't give anybody the free pass to be like, oh, okay, we've got this major That's exactly what Log4j was, right? This is how you open the segment, Sean. Log4j, that was a patching issue.
Yeah. I mean, would you
OpenSSL too?
What kind of disruption do you want? Do you want the disruption, when you're prepared for it, when you're applying the patch, or the disruption when you choose not to, and somebody, takes advantage of that? Right?
At least
both are disruptive.
If you're applying the patch, you know what's going to happen.
Right, and I've talked to a lot of security leaders who are like, you know what, we're not doing patch testing groups anymore. Like we're just gonna make sure we have a good rollback plan. And, the moment, these patches are available, and this isn't, in only a few cases am I seeing this in production environments. This is mostly with workstations and stuff like that, where they're saying, you know what, any individual, even if it's the CEO, we're just going to take that risk. We're going to force a reboot and just make sure we've got everything up to date on those systems.
I get it. I mean, we're pretty much at that point. And as we talked about in the news segment last week, Eclipsium releasing the information about the issues with IPMI and those hardware-based components, effectively the computer and the computer, having a tremendous vulnerability. And now the server hardware is vulnerable. I mentioned last week that admins don't update server firmware like ever. Because it is disruptive, and unless you're having a problem, you usually don't do those updates. Those firmware updates for servers are now critically important because of the security aspects of them with the IPMI systems, those integrated systems that enable management, out-of-band management, such as HP ILO and Dell iDRAC.
Yeah, remember when nobody was going after IoT systems, and then we had Mirai? And that was not the outcome we were expecting, right? Like, I went back and looked at some really old predictions, and all the IoT security predictions were that all the stuff in our home was going to be getting hacked. But the problem with a prediction like that is you're not thinking about it from the attacker perspective. Like, how are they going to monetize that at scale? Like, you're not. Like, you hack a $100 Google Home, I just get a new Google Home and throw the old one out, right? Like, it's right. And I don't see any, like, you're not going to ransom it, right? Like, maybe a Tesla. Maybe you can ransom, an expensive piece of property like that. That's the reason they're going after enterprises, is because there's 6 and 7 figures, that, and they even do this. Like, the initial access brokers will get access to hundreds and hundreds of companies. Then they'll look up their revenue, and they're just going to sort by how much money they think that company can pay. Or they hit the cyber insurance companies and they see who has the largest policy. And now they know what to ask for. So, like a lot of these predictions, and what ends up happening with IoT is, they're not going to monetize taking control of the IoT devices. They use them for DDoS attacks, that they could rent out. So you got to think about the money side of this.
Absolutely.
We're telling security people they need to be business minded all the time and understand the business and how to talk to the business. That helps you on the cybercrime side as well.
Absolutely. And as much maligned as NAT was and has been from a security perspective, NAT has done some protection from these IoT devices. I mean, every home now effectively it has a NAT device that your systems behind that are in. So those IoT devices are not necessarily probably not exposed to the entire internet. I mean, they might show up on Showdown occasionally, depending on how you configure it. But you're absolutely right, Adrian. When you're talking about these IoT systems, what's more interesting than an attacker going after a single device or a couple devices in people's homes, or even getting control of the overall network of IoT devices? And now you have millions of them around the world in different locations that you can leverage as part of that attack platform. It's staggering the scale difference with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and looking at what they used to do, trying to sell individual credit card numbers and, people's PII and stuff like that, you'd have to set up a market, you try and sell as many as you can before the banks find out and cancel all those cards. You're maybe monetizing just a tiny, tiny fraction of what you've stolen in some of these cases, like Home Depot and Target and some of those. And it's and so many steps they like to monetize that. Now I'm going to buy an iPhone, and then with that stolen card, and then sell it, and then I get to cash out. It was like a 17-step process for them to get paid. Whereas with ransomware now, again, look at the business model. The business case here. Now it's 3 or 4 steps. It doesn't take months. Now it takes weeks for them to get paid. And instead of getting these little piddly payments, like a bunch of $1 to $20, depending on whether it's full mag stripe or just card and expiration or whatever, whatever these things were going for at that point. Now it's big paydays, 6-7 digit paydays when they do get that payday.
Yeah, I find it interesting since most of those are using Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a ledger, as we've heard about, and all of that's public. Like Bitcoin has been talked about being anonymous. Well, it's not. It's not anonymous because there's a ledger of every transaction. But if you can tie an actual wallet ID to a person, then there's nothing hidden about that, at any level. But Bitcoin is definitely, and cryptocurrency has definitely changed the game from having to have, duffel bags of cash being shuttled through a broker to be dropped off to unlock
By a
something.
mule, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we have a situation where we can use Bitcoin and just transfer that money. Probably brokers are involved as well for ransomware payments. A lot of that has become less legal to illegal in the U.S. So there's a number of things that have to be done to get around that. But to your point earlier, Adrian, you said that the ransomware actors are going to look up to see who has policies and how big those policies might be.
Yeah.
We saw in the SolarWinds issue, you could go to the SolarWinds site and see who their customers were.
Right.
So if you want to attack and get that sort of supply chain level access to a system, you can often just go and look at the vendor's website to see who their customers are and then be like, okay, well, let's go after them. Let's see what access we can get. And maybe an access broker jumps into that and thinks that there's value in that to compromise that environment to then sell it to someone else. I mean, certainly access to a network that's a Fortune 50, Fortune 100 is got some good dollars associated with it, which is why it's dangerous. And last year I saw an article in the summer that where there was ransomware actors that were basically saying, hey, if you install this on your computer in your corporate environment for us, we will pay you Bitcoin.
Oh, man.
That's insane.
Oh, boy.
Adrian's going, oh, I missed the boat on that one.
Oh, no, that's not what that was at all. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people get in desperate situations. They're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe they're not making it paycheck to paycheck. Maybe it's paycheck plus a little bit on a credit card, then another paycheck and a little bit on a credit card, and criminals know this. It's why some of them are criminals, right? They understand how to take advantage of desperate people. And I hadn't heard that one before, but that's not surprising at all, Sean. It's really depressing, but it's not surprising.
And then can you even trust them to give you Bitcoin after you give them access? Right. I certainly wouldn't think so. I mean, here are folks that are basically actively compromising, and then they're going to cut you off a chunk of what they're doing.
I've heard a lot of criminals are highly reliable, because they want to do repeat business, right? Like, oh, you got a new job somewhere else? Well, let's do it all over again. Install this implant for me.
You were let go from the other company for clicking a link, and now you're somewhere else. I'm sorry, I clicked the link. I didn't know what was going on.
Is that why people are clicking links? They get paid Bitcoin?
They're getting paid to click links, just act stupid.
Oh, boy.
It's interesting. Speaking of the past year, this wasn't necessarily a trend or a big story or whatever, but at one of the events that I went to, an author, Maria Konnikova, she wrote the book, The Confidence Game, and I read that afterwards because she gave a great talk. And I was so impressed by it. And it talks about how con artists come to be and some of the tactics and techniques that they use. And, we've been talking about this in security too, with phishing and social engineering and things of that nature. But this dove in at a completely different level. And so she talks about why people get into crime and how they actually convince others to go along with their con games.
That sounds really fascinating. Is this online where you can watch it?
It was a book. It's
a book. Okay, I thought you said it was
so The Confidence Game by Maria Konnikova. There's a sheep on the cover. I got mine digitally, but I'll throw it in the chat here. She gave this incredible talk. It was one of the best talks that I've seen at a conference. It wasn't immediately related to security, but of course, this is how criminals work. And her point of view was also, this is how we as defenders can also use this con game to understand what's going on in our environments, what we have to do, how we have to think more aggressively or more offensively versus defensively, because you do have to look at it from the attacker point of view. And some of my co-hosts have a little more devious minds than I do. So, and I've talked to a lot of pen testers over the years who have this ability to switch that on and think in that way. But the psychology behind it is really, really interesting. And it says a lot about what can be done if you are just to use psychology to your advantage.
Yeah, those are fascinating stories, and I almost wonder, like, because you hear some of these folks, like, they go to jail for the con, and then they get out and they go right back into another con, and it almost seems like that's the game. Like, it's not about the money; it's about like the satisfaction of pulling off a con, almost. Like they're just
for sure.
addicted to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I heard Kornikova when you said Konikova as the author name, and my mind went right back to the early days of viruses.
Yeah,
right. With Anna Kournikova and the virus that went around that, and ultimately thinking back, things haven't changed that much. There is a hook that you get people in with an email. They do something with that, and then you gain access or you gain whatever that thing is. It's just changed from malicious damage to actually a business now, which is interesting. It makes sense, though. A lot of things start as malicious, and then you realize, okay, I can make money with this. There's teenagers that will steal cars to joyride, and then at some point, some of them may realize, all right, well, we could actually sell these cars. And it seems like a very similar thing that's happening or has happened with this as we see ransomware. And then it gets more formalized. When money is involved, big amounts of money, it becomes a real business. And a number of these ransomware groups, they break down, restructure, spin up somewhere else. People kind of move around from place to place, almost like they have a CV or a resume that they pass on to the next group. It's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Let's shift a little bit. I wanted to mention some of my favorite episodes this year. I don't have numbers for all of them, but maybe it's recency bias, but the one we just had on Estonia, I think was just absolutely fascinating. How Estonia digitized their government, their culture, services for citizens, all that stuff. The idea of what did they call it? Digital citizenship?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and all the things about having an AI bot that can perform tasks for you as a citizen and not have to wait in line, that things happen automatically. And all the systems in Estonia are made for this. So you go in, you say you want to change your address or whatever, and the bot handles that for you, connects to each of the systems, confirms it because you have a digital identity. It's incredible.
Yeah. And then we had Andrew Morris, the founder and CEO of Gray Noise, on earlier this year. Talking about I think we talked about his product a little bit, but we were mostly talking about all the noise in the market. And it was funny because we were talking about, how it seemed unsustainable and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And this would have been, I think this was episode 264. This is in March. So just a couple months before we got a pretty solid answer to, our questions about, is this sustainable? But
yeah, I'm a huge fan of Andrew. I've known him for years, and his company Gray Noise, sifting through the noise in events and what's happening, basically identifying that in the world there's a lot of scanning happening, but not all that's targeted. We used to have the big pew maps, so to speak, on the wall in the SOC showing all these different attacks, but all of those, or the majority of those, probably 99.999% of them, are just random noise that happens just everywhere on the internet. And with Gray Noise, being able to identify what is the background noise or the gray noise of the internet versus what's targeted is pretty valuable. And it's an interesting approach to, again, solving a problem that's been there for years, but no one's been able to figure out what a good solution is around that. Being able to filter out that noise to get to the signal is another important thing. But yeah, Andrew's great to just talk about industry and his perspective about things and where things are going. It's always fun to talk to Andrew.
Before we wrap here, do you have any favorites from this year?
Me, definitely Martin Roche, who created Snort. That was certainly one of my highlights, because I remember putting Snort on a computer that I had and just hanging it off my internet connection and seeing what I could see, and working with it later as well. It's interesting. It's great talking to someone who actually defines a market, basically creates a new product segment because that person thinks it's important, something they're interested in, and then all of a sudden you see that there's packet sniffers that are happening everywhere, like all sorts from there to Wireshark, Ethereal, etc. It's incredible to see how things have evolved, especially from the IDS IPS market.
Katie?
For me, I really enjoyed all the segments with Will Lin, and I'm a little sad. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get him back in that same forum in 2023, but just his perspectives on the market and how he thinks about things. He wasn't necessarily a traditional investor the way some of them are. So his ideas and the way he approached the market was always fascinating to me.
Yeah, likewise. And for those that don't know, Will Lin, we actually have a news story because he's announcing a book as he exits the VC space and becomes a founder. He's starting a security company. No details on what that company is going to be doing yet, but he's also announced a book, and we'll talk about that in the news segment coming up here. And right there's probably we'll have to find another VC for our VC corner, right? So with that, we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.